Hey guys, welcome back to the Anime Collector. For this week's tip, we're going to be talking about budgeting. Now this is also part 2 of how to maintain balance, okay? If you have not already seen it, I highly suggest that you go check out last week's tip on how to maintain balance, because these are the most important tips that I am probably going to ever tell you on this channel, okay? Now I want you guys to understand that even though we call collecting a hobby, it is actually an addiction, okay? The majority of people who collect, if not everybody who collects, especially at the level that I collect, we have addictive personalities, okay? Now I was very fortunate that I at least had the wisdom to recognize that when I started this collection. When I was a kid growing up, I collected everything, okay? I collected Pogs, I collected bottle caps, I collected baseball cards. I don't even like baseball. Okay, I made the decision to start collecting anime on DVD because it was something that I was very passionate about. Okay, and I knew that if I could start collecting anime, I could let the other collections go. Okay, I made this the only thing in my life. Living with this addiction, living with an addictive personality is all about making compromises in order to stay a functioning individual in society while dealing with these demons. Okay? Now I want you guys to understand that early on in my collecting career, I made the decision that I wanted to own every show that I had ever seen on TV. Okay? Now, this was not me making this decision, it was the addiction making this decision, and I knew that there was nothing that I could do to fight it outright. So what I did is I made a compromise. I decided that it would be better off for me to exclusively watch shows that I own. Because if I could avoid watching the shows on TV, then I wouldn't feel obligated to go out and buy those shows. Alright? This was one of the ways that I have worked to try to curb the addiction. Alright? Now, when it comes to fighting this addiction, you have to be unflinchingly rigid. Okay, that's why having a budget is very important. Now last week I talked about why it's so important to maintain a balance between the anime that you buy and the anime that you watch. Okay, now the great thing about this is that if you actually watch all the anime that you've bought, you end up at a balance of 0. Meaning that in order to keep watching anime, if you work the same way that I do, where you exclusively watch shows that you own, it means that you have to go out and buy something more. Now, if you can limit yourself when you go out to buy something, if you buy one show at a time, or you buy a small haul of shows, and then you decide to watch those shows before you move on to go out and buy more, that is the best way to maintain balance. That's the best way to budget, okay? This isn't necessarily about money. Now, if you let this addiction get out of control, it will suck out your bank account, okay? Now, I have had the wisdom to move into this field, into this addiction, without letting that control me in that way. I've been able to stay on top of it. I've been able to create rules for myself that prevent me from letting it get out of hand. Last week I told you guys that in the year 2007, when I graduated from high school, I was given some graduation presents from my family, and I actually ended up getting a lot of money out of it. Okay? Later on that year, when I went to Anime Expo, I actually ended up spending around $1,000. That sets a very dangerous precedent, because if I'm okay with spending $1,000 at Anime Expo in 2007, what's going to stop me from doing it again in 2008? If I'm willing to spend $100 on one single DVD just because it's rare, next time I come across a DVD that's rare that costs $100, I'm not going to think twice about it because I've already done it once. If that DVD costs $120, I might still pick it up. And then if I get a DVD for $120, then I might not think twice when it's $150. And if I get that $150 DVD, then I might not think twice when it's $200. Okay? You have to be unflinchingly rigid when it comes to your budget in order to maintain balance. Alright? Because if I let my hand open a little bit to let some cash out in the face of this addiction, it's going to be a lot harder to close my grip again than it is to open it even more. Okay? And if you let it, this addiction will bankrupt you. Last week I quoted Chuck Palahniuk from his novel Fight Club saying that the things you own end up owning you. And I explained that this is especially true for collectors. Okay? But that's not the full quote. The full quote is actually, the things you own end up owning you. It's only after you've lost everything that you're free to do anything. If this addiction is controlling your life, if it is putting you in financial ruin, the only way to take your life back is to get rid of your collection. Now, you have to understand that as hard as that might be to do, if you find yourself in this downward spiral, you're going to lose more than just your collection. Okay? If you get bankrupted from this, you'll lose your house, you'll lose your car, you'll lose your collection as well. Okay? That's why it's so important to recognize that for a lot of people, especially people who collect at the level that I collect, this is not a hobby. This is an addiction. Guys, I was incredibly fortunate that even as a child I had the wisdom to recognize the self-destructive pattern of the collection addiction. I am not passionate about baseball. Why on earth was I collecting baseball cards? I am passionate about anime. I made the cognitive decision to redirect this unhealthy addiction towards something more constructive. I channeled this addiction towards something more constructive. I don't think it's hard for you guys to understand how passionate I am about anime. Look at the reviews I put forth on this channel. I dive head first into these shows. I analyze, I study the choices made by the filmmakers. I get an enjoyment out of this that the majority of you are never going to fully understand. When I call this a collection addiction, I'm actually sugarcoating it. People who have an addiction on the level that I have this addiction need to recognize that we don't have a collection addiction. This is deeper and darker than that. We are hoarders at heart. Now, I made the cognitive decision to direct this unhealthy addiction towards something that I'm passionate about, so that I could say goodbye to a box of bottle caps. Why do I need a box of bottle caps? I don't. I am not passionate about baseball. Why do I need baseball cards? I don't. Personally, I think that the reason people turn to collections is it's a way for them to control their addiction. It's a way for them to control their hoarding. If you can contain your hoarding into one thing, in this case anime DVDs, it gives you control over it. This is how you fight the slavery of this addiction. Now, if you're new to collecting and it scares you, the idea that you could get enveloped in this addiction, you have to understand that if you do have this addiction, nothing is going to stop you from collecting. All right? And it is a much better alternative than being a hoarder. Now, I'm giving you guys these tips specifically because if you are unflinchingly rigid, you're going to be okay. But make sure you understand why it's so significantly important to maintain a very strict budget. Your budget needs to be flexible and it needs to be realistic. All right? You need to be a lot more flexible with your budget when you're making less money than when you're making more money. If your hours are cut, your budget should drop to almost zero. If you haven't been able to maintain balance, if you've got anime in your collection you haven't watched yet, use this as an opportunity to correct that balance back to zero. Watch the anime you already own. Alright? If you are making less money, you will not know exactly when that money is going to come back. Okay? And as I said before, it's a lot harder to close your grip on your money in this addiction than it is to open your hand and let it fly. Alright? So when you're making more money, don't raise your budget. Keep it the same or spend less. Because as I told you guys last week, when I got that job and my collection exploded and grew exponentially, I learned the lesson the hard way about maintaining balance. I am still a slave to half of the anime in my collection because I haven't had the time to watch it yet. Alright? This causes a lot of stress. It makes it less fun to enjoy this hobby. Alright? This turns it into a chore. One of the most important skill sets you can get with this addiction is to recognize when the decisions you're making are not made by you, but instead are being made by the addiction. Okay? Now, when I was younger, I managed to recognize the fact that when I decided I wanted to own all the shows I'd ever seen on TV, that it wasn't me making that decision, it was the addiction. I could not battle that decision. No amount of willpower would allow me to battle that decision. okay? So what I had to do was make a compromise. I had to decide to fight that addiction-driven decision by deciding to exclusively watch shows that I own, all right? Now I know I have another addiction-driven decision. When I go to the mall, when I go to a store where they sell anime, I am going to go in there. No amount of willpower is going to stop me. So if I'm struggling with my money, if I know I don't have a lot, the compromise I make is to not go to those stores, not go to the mall. Okay? I avoid those places like the plague because that's the only way that I can prevent myself from allowing the addiction to put me in those stores. Alright? You have to understand when you're making decisions that are actually being made by the addiction, and that's how you fight it, that's how you stay on top of it, that's how you prevent it from making you a slave. Okay? Now I do want to make this distinction that for some people, not all people, but for some people it is possible to have a perfectly healthy relationship with their collection, with this hobby. Okay? It is possible. Alright? Now, for all collectors, not just some collectors, but for all collectors, it's very important to take a step back every once in a while and look at your collection and look at what collecting is doing to your life. Just look for any sort of negativity. Seek out any sort of negativity. Find it if it's there. If it's hurting your balance, if it's causing you stress because you've lost your balance, if it's hurting your budget, if it's hurting you financially, look for anything that could be causing negativity with your hobby. And if you can catch it early on, you can work towards preventing it from getting worse. You can actually, if you are vigilant enough, you can actually stop it from being a problem. All right, that's why it's so important to look. Now, you want to be very realistic with yourself. Try as hard as you can not to let yourself go into denial because that is self-destructive. All right? When we have a vice, we go into denial because probably deep down inside we know we have a problem, but we don't want to give it up. All right? When somebody tells you that you have a problem, you go into denial because you don't want to give up your addiction. You don't want to give up your vice. All right? Now, I've been intentionally overly dramatic in this video to try to help anybody out there who has a little bit of a problem and maybe is unwilling to admit it to themselves, but they do sort of know deep down that they have a problem, to try to wake you up, okay? I want people to realize just how vicious this can get, how much this can control you, and how miserable it can make you if you're unable to take control over it. Now, I admit that I have an addiction to collecting, all right? I recognize where it's controlling me, and I work really hard to battle that by creating rules that I know I can follow. I am unflinchingly rigid with the rules that I have so that I can stay on top of these problems. Now, it probably would be healthier for me to just get rid of the collection altogether, right? That seems like that would be the case. It seems like if I lost my collection in a fire or something, it would hurt a lot. I spent 10 years collecting. It would hurt a lot for a month or so. And then eventually I'd probably be a lot healthier, a lot happier in life if I could give it up. That's what it seems like. Now, maybe I am still in denial in some way. I'll admit that. But the reason that I don't just try to get rid of everything, and the reason that I don't try to give this up is because I know that if I can channel my negative addictions, what I have in my life, this obsessive compulsive nature, if I can channel that towards something that I'm passionate about, I know that I have an addictive personality. I know that if I didn't have this in my life, if I didn't live my life battling these demons, I'd have a lot worse things to deal with. I would rather be collecting anime than hoarding everything. You know what I mean? I would rather be doing this because I know that I would be susceptible to much more destructive patterns if this wasn't what was consuming me. Alright? The easiest way to quit smoking is to never start smoking. Alright? That's why I try really hard to stay on top of this, because if I want to remain, a functioning person in society, I have to, be unflinchingly rigid. I have to be very vigilant with this. Now, I want to share a sign with you that I recognize is something that's unhealthy with the way that I collect, but it might be a sign that could, give you a little bit of hope that maybe you don't have necessarily as big of a problem as I do. So, let's see. I've got the box set of Air Gear, and I've also got the art box with the individual DVDs. All right, I've also got the box set of Angelic Layer and the art box with all the individual DVDs. I've also got the box set of Azumanga and the art box with all the individual DVDs. Now, in this particular case, I decided to buy the art box with all the individual DVDs after I already owned the box set, because the Azumanga mini movie is on the final disc of this version with the volume 6, right? But it's not featured in this box set. So I bought this version because it was superior to this version. It provided content that this version didn't have. Now, if you found yourself in a similar situation where you had two versions of the same movie, but one version was superior, one version was like a 2-disc special edition version which had a lot more special features, and it actually had everything that this version had and more, and you were able to give the inferior version away, or you were able to sell it or just get rid of it, that means that you have a healthier habit with your hobby, okay? In that case, you probably are living a perfectly healthy way where this is merely a hobby and not an addiction for you, okay? If you are upgrading to Blu-ray, and as you're buying the shows that you really like on Blu-ray, if you already have them on DVD, you're selling the DVDs or giving them away or whatever, that means you probably have a perfectly healthy relationship with your collection, okay? I recognize, I am not in denial, I am never going to get rid of these, okay? I'm going to keep both. It doesn't matter. This is unhealthy, okay? This is an unhealthy way for me to do it. I know that this is my obsessive-compulsive nature. This is me being a hoarder, all right? And I have to recognize that that's the problem, because knowing I have a problem is how I'm able to start healing, you know what I mean? Now, understand, I didn't start collecting anime on DVD until I was about 14 or 15 years old, okay? Because DVDs didn't even exist when I was born, right? Now, I told you that I used to collect a lot of different things when I was growing up. I used to collect Spider-Man action figures. I used to collect Star Wars action figures. I collect Robin comic books, which is weird, I know. Being the younger sibling, I always sort of favored Luigi over Mario, Robin over Batman, Piccolo over Goku. Also, my favorite color was green, so that kind of makes sense. But, you know, I had all these things that I liked. You know, I liked Spider-Man at one time. I liked Star Wars at one time. I liked Batman and Robin. You know, but I wasn't passionate about it, right? So, I grew up in a very small room, and the stuff in my room was suffocating me. You know, this is that hoarding mentality. And I would look at these Star Wars action figures, and I would look at them thinking I couldn't get rid of them. I didn't even like Star Wars anymore. I didn't have any control over my life in that aspect, but I just could not get rid of them. You know, same thing with these Spider-Man action figures. I had action figures that were broken, or the legs were missing, but I still could not bring myself to throw them away. Alright? Now, my God, my generation, we got into this Beanie Baby craze. You know, when I was in middle school, even the teachers were pushing this Beanie Baby craze on everybody. It was absurd. Now, I think that part of the reason why we collect is because it's a way to control our hoarding problem, number one. But I think that it's also because we think it's going to make us rich. A lot of people think if they hold on to something for enough years, if they hold on to issue 1 of Spider-Man, even though, as I talked about in my rare DVDs tip, that doesn't end up being the case. It's not going to make you rich. But we think that it's going to make us rich. We thought that Beanie Babies were going to be something we could sell in 20 years and we could buy a yacht. Okay? Now the problem with that is supply and demand. Nobody wants Beanie Babies today, right? Nobody cares. The only people who actually profited off of Beanie Babies was the company that made Beanie Babies, alright? They trick us, similar to how, like, think about this. We've got Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. We've got these holidays where we're expected, we're sort of socially engineered to get chocolates and flowers and greeting cards especially. And the greeting card companies make bank with how many people, every time a holiday comes around, they make a ton of money, because we go and buy greeting cards. It's sort of like how the idea that a man should spend 3 months' paycheck on an engagement ring, that idea was put forth by the diamond companies. You know, they're exploiting the consumer base. All right, so this is sort of why we collect. It comes into play now. Personally, when I decided to start collecting anime, and I had been collecting anime in different forms before DVDs came out, and I ended up latching onto this specifically because I used to collect Dragon Ball Z action figures, which I still have because they're tied into this sort of habit, you know. But once I got into collecting it and I directed all my collecting towards this more constructive sort of habit, I was able to get rid of the Star Wars figurines. You know, I was able to say goodbye. I was able to get rid of the Pogs and the bottle caps and the baseball cards. Or rather, even if I haven't necessarily gotten rid of everything, I don't, you know, hoard it as much. You know, if I had an opportunity to get rid of it, I would. If somebody found something in my house that I didn't even realize I still had, that at one time I would have wanted to hold dearly and just never get rid of it, if they asked me, hey, can I have this, I'd be like, yes, please take it. You know, this is how we sort of evolve in our hoarding mentality, right? Especially when you are able to direct your habit towards something more constructive. So I want you guys to understand that there's a very specific reason why I have not made a tip on this channel called exclusively watch shows that you own. I recognize that just because I created a rule which helps me to battle my addiction demons doesn't mean it's going to help everybody else with theirs, alright? Now, again, it is possible to have a perfectly healthy relationship with your collection, alright? Even if you don't want to get rid of the inferior version of a show that you've got two of, even if you don't want to get rid of your DVDs just because you buy the Blu-ray version of a show that you like, alright? It is possible for some people to have a perfectly healthy relationship with their collection. But if you have an addictive personality like I do, alright, if you have an obsessive-compulsive nature like I do, and for most people they don't recognize that they have these traits, they don't realize the negativity it's bringing into their lives. This is why it's incredibly important for all collectors to take a step back at least once a week. Schedule this into your routine. At least once a week you should take a step back and look at your past week and see if there's any negativity in your life. And find out if your collection may have caused it. Be realistic with yourself. Do not be in denial. Okay, you are much better off if you recognize the negativity than if you deny it's there. Alright? I don't want you to just look out for negativity in your life. I want you to actively search for the negativity in your life. Okay? If it's affecting your balance and causing stress in your life, that's negativity. If it's affecting your budget and hurting you financially, that's negativity. Alright? If it's hurting your relationships, that's negativity. If it's hurting the amount of sleep you get and it's affecting your health, that's negativity. You need to find compromises that you know you can stick to so that you can battle the negativity that's bringing in, because this is something that can easily become a stressor. You want your hobby to remain what relieves your stress instead of causing your stress. That's why I've made so many tips on this channel. Things that seem like they might be extra work, but in the long run, they're going to help you a lot. Now guys, I actually know where my whole mindset of I have to own every show that I watched came from. When I was in high school, I had a friend who wasn't necessarily a collector, but he was addicted to anime, the way that we're all sort of addicted to anime at one point, where we exclusively watch fan subs and Japan is superior and America sucks, that whole sort of mentality that we go through for that phase. And he told me that he had a rule that he lived by in his anime watching, where if he starts a show, he'll make it a point to finish the show, even if he turns out to not like it. Okay, even if the show ends up not being as good as he hoped it would be, even if it becomes a show that he hates, he will make it a point to watch it from beginning to end. Okay, that resonated with me. Okay, that's something that I adopted into my life. That's something that I made part of my code when it came to watching and collecting anime. Now, because I was collecting, because that was something I was doing, I recognized the dangerous pattern right away when I was watching shows that were fan subs that hadn't come out in America, and it started to create this stress in my life where I felt like I might not be able to get certain shows on DVD. Okay, there are still some shows today that I've seen in fan sub form that have not yet been released in America. And it caused stress in my life. It made me panic. It made me feel like I wasn't going to be able to assimilate them into my collection. And that's why I created the compromise where I exclusively watch shows that I own. That's my way of dealing with that. Now, this is actually exactly how it's handled in the show Dexter, okay? Now, if I tell you that if you have the collection addiction, that absolutely no amount of willpower is actually going to be able to help you and prevent you from collecting. It's something you're going to do. If you have the hoarder instinct, this very destructive, addictive habit is going to control you unless you're aware that you have it. Unless you recognize these demons affecting you. Okay? If you are able to stop and see that this is happening, you can generate a code that you can live by to protect you from being brought into destruction. Okay? I can actually take this hoarding instinct, which is a very destructive, stressful addiction, and I can take that stressful addiction and I can channel it into something I'm passionate about. I can literally take the stressful addiction and turn it into something that actually relieves stress from my life. Okay? If I am unflinchingly rigid with my code, if I decide that if I'm going to be stuck doing this because this is part of my addiction, that I should exclusively watch shows that I own, I can curb some of that extra stress. In Dexter, Harry created a kill code because he knew that it was ingrained in Dexter's psyche that he was going to be a serial killer. He recognized the signs right away, okay? He knew that there was absolutely nothing that he could do and no amount of willpower would stop Dexter from killing because he had an addiction to killing. So if he could exclusively kill killers, he could do some good. He could bring something positive out of it. Alright? So just recognize that if you are willing to take charge of a bad situation, you can turn it into a good situation. Okay? In Dexter, whenever he strayed from the code, it caused some very negative repercussions in his life. Now, make no mistake about this, if you were not as fortunate as I was to recognize the destructive patterns of this addiction early on, and you find yourself in a situation where you're losing your loved ones because of this addiction, or you're losing your house because of this addiction, if you find that you're in a place where you're too far down the rabbit hole and the only thing that's going to save you is to actually get rid of your collection, I totally understand that that is so much easier said than done. Why was I unable to get rid of broken Spider-Man toys? It's easier said than done. So if you find yourself in this pattern, in a destructive place where you think that you're too far gone and you're not going to be able to climb your way out unless you get rid of it, send me a private message and I will try to help you through it, because this is going to be a really hard time for you. But if you're able to get rid of it before you hit rock bottom, it's going to be an easier climb back up to the top. Okay? So if it's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything, if you think about it, in the series finale of Dexter, he lost everything. And it did technically make him free to do anything, but unfortunately he was happier when he stuck to the code. If you watch the series, he's happiest when he sticks to the code in an unflinchingly rigid manner. Okay? Now understand that budgeting and maintaining balance actually go hand in hand. Alright, if you find yourself in a similar situation like I do, where I've got an absurd amount of anime in my collection that I don't feel like I have time for, and I'm getting anime faster than I can watch it, so my collection is continuing to grow while I don't have any time at all really to watch it. Understand that if I were to avoid going to the mall, avoid going near these stores that sell anime, the stores I know I'm going to go into if I get near them, if I can avoid that, I'm going to cut off the supply of anime coming into my collection. Alright? And then anytime that I have to watch anime is going to be time that's going to help bring the balance a little bit closer to zero. Now, I have a very daunting task with how much anime I actually have to watch. Okay, it is going to be very difficult for me. All right, and it's important to realize that we don't just need to budget our money, we also need to budget our time. And there's a lot of things we do in our society where we actually waste our time in ways we don't necessarily realize. Try to start recognizing how much time you spend scrolling through Facebook or browsing Reddit. How much time you're literally just a zombie in front of the computer doing absolutely nothing. That time could be spent helping get your balance back to zero. Understand that just because I exclusively watch shows that I own does not mean that I have to watch them on the DVD. Alright? If I'm out of the house and I've got a moment to look up a show on Netflix, if I have that show already, I can watch it on Netflix in order to check it off the list. Try to find ways in order to budget your time very efficiently. Alright? Now, this is the tip for this week. I hope you guys take this to heart. Alright? Budgeting is one of the most important things, and maintaining balance is one of the most important ways you can alleviate the stress. Alright, so let's go ahead and put this dollar sign up on the shelf. And if you've got any strategies that have helped you in order to keep your collection addiction under control, please send them to me. Alright, I'm going to put everything that I get in the description of this video so that if anybody out there is struggling right now, they can look through that list and they might be able to find something that will help them keep it under control. And until I get my next review done, I'm going to keep sending you guys over the Super Dyneken channel. So if you haven't done it yet, go check it out. Alright? Anyway, I'll see you guys next week for another tip.